Hey guys, this is Collin Moshman for Postflopizer. Today we're going to look at an incredible tool for analyzing your hands. Like you probably know, if you want to be a top no-limit player, you need to understand the GTO approach to postflop play. If you don't know what your game theory optimal strategy is, good opponents can exploit your imbalances. So we'll show you how to make sure that never happens. And more than that, you need to be prepared to face all different types of opponents. Sometimes you won't actually want to play a perfectly balanced line, and Postflopizer will show you how to take an exploitative approach that incorporates your reads, creativity, or knowledge of population tendencies to make the most money possible against the many different player types you come across. So let's begin, and throughout this video, we're going to be looking at one specific hand as a way to show the capabilities of Postflopizer. Here in a mega deep stacked Hustler Casino Live cash game with a $1,000 big blind, Tom Dwan and Doug Polk collide in a massive pot worth over $1 million. It was a fascinating and complex hand, and we're going to break down whether these guys made the correct decision on all post-flop streets, including the controversial river action. To do that, I've loaded the hand up into the ICMIZER replayer, and it was a 7-handed spot with a $2,000 big blind ante. And action is going to fold to Doug Polk in the cutoff, who opened 3Xs. Tom Dwan puts out the 3-bet just under 5X in the small blind. Doug Polk elects to take a flop. And the first decision, we're going to be mainly looking at this hand from Doug Polk's perspective, with the first major decision being Doug Polk's decision to float this flop C-bet with the 2 backdoor draws. Tom Dwan follows up on the turn, and Doug Polk, with his open-ended straight draw, elects to make a semi-bluff raise, which gets called. At the river, Doug Polk, believing you should never leave those soldiers behind, makes the overbet bluff with his 5-high. And interestingly, Tom Dwan only calls with pocket 7s. So this seems like a pretty strong hand to just call. Should he have raised here instead? We'll look at that decision as well. So this is the hand, and our first thing that we want to do is load this hand up into Postflopizer. You can load with 2 ways. The first way is going to be quick mode. Quick mode, even though it's meant to get started very quickly, actually allows a nice degree of customization. We can see the replayer and look at any spot from heads up to full ring. We can select positions. We can do a single raise pot, 3-bet pot, or 4-bet pot. We can use one of these stack presets or put in whatever we want and make this the effective stack, and also edit ranges. The main reasons we would need to go to advanced mode would be to account for additional dead money, as well as to modify the game tree. We want to do both of those in this particular hand, so let's go to advanced mode. So we'll go for each section of the Create Postflop tab. The first one's going to be pretty simple, which is flop. Unsorted is going to mean that you can have the flop display in any way you want. And most of the time, though, I would just leave it unsorted, which will be by rank, and we have this King 7 deuce flop. Next thing is going to be stack. This will be the effective stack, normalized to big blinds. In this case, that'll be 1,000 blinds. The pre-flop bet is going to be Tom Dwan's 3-bet to 14,000, which is 14 big blinds. And between the big blind ante as well as the normal posted big blind, the total pre-flop pot is going to be 31 big blinds. Now let's talk about how to modify the game tree, and we'll come back in a moment to ranges. So there are 2 ways that we can modify the game tree. One is under tree settings, and one is the tree preview and editor, and the 2 are very connected. So right now, we have flop out of position, and let's take a more normal situation where the in-position player raises pre-flop, say the big blind defends, and let's say we don't want to allow a flop donk bet. So if I click here, this is going to disappear. We now are not allowing a flop donk bet, and that is automatically updated in the tree preview and editor. I can go the other direction And if I add in, say, two sizings, a small one and a big one, we'll see them in the tree preview and editor. They'll automatically appear. So now one option is we donk bet a third of pot. We just love donk betting. So we'll give ourselves another option of 150% of pot. And these options are going to appear here. Now, one thing that you can do to edit is we can clone flop OOP. So whichever square you have just edited will be the one that shows up to clone. So if we want these same bet and raise sizes for a different street or player, we can do that. And if I modify, let's say turn IP, this will be the option to clone instead. So we'll go ahead and add an overbet raise on the turn, and this will switch to saying clone turn IP, as this is the last one we've edited. So you can make the tree however you want it. And again, you can navigate here and it'll automatically update based on tree settings. So I can have a bet of 10, a raise, a call. We now head to turn, and we can fully preview the tree. One thing that's very cool is we can also edit from within the tree preview and editor. So here, if I right click on this particular node of dealing turn, I can add child, and I can add on another turn betting size. And one thing that I can do as well, of course, we can similarly delete and make this however we want. One thing I think is really cool is we have two ways of doing this. We can do it as percent of pot, which should be probably a little more common, but if you have a size and big blinds you want, we can also do that. So I want an option of betting 150 big blinds. I can add that. It becomes its own node. We can select it and fully preview all the action in the tree preview and editor. Now, when we have done that, when we've changed things, this is going to create overrides. So let me show you guys that. Let's say here that I'm going to delete this donk bet, and here on the turn, I'm going to also create more options. I'm going to give a larger sizing. So anytime that you create new options and change tree settings, these are going to appear as overrides. And the flop override here is the sizing. We can delete it here, or we can remove all. So you can see all of these again under advanced settings by street. Round template bets means that instead of 18.6 or 59.5, that we stick with whole number bets. All-in threshold is what percent of the effective stack has to be wagered before we consider the two players to be effectively all in. And our required exploitability, so that's the level of accuracy that we require, and I would normally leave at 1%. Now, when you have this how you like it, you can then save it. So here, for example, if I like this, I can save current preset. I'll say S3, I don't know what that means, but why not? And then we can toggle between different presets. And I already have our $1 million game set up. So again, we can see here, after the flop is dealt, Tom Dwan c-bets 15 or checks. Assuming he c-bets, there's a call, and we see all of the action as it actually happened. The last thing that we need to do is specify ranges. So let's begin with Tom Dwan's range. Like normal, you can use the sliders, make ranges whatever you want, exclude premium hands. If you like a range, you can save it. And I just hit enter, it's saved. You can toggle between ranges. And so the range here, I've of course called this Tom Dwan. And we're going to assume that he's kind of tight. He's very deep stacked, out of position. So we basically have him 3-betting fairly strong hands for value, 7s plus, ace queen, ace 9 suited. Some of these Broadway hands that his light 3-bet range to balance is going to be suited wheel aces and a few mid-suited connectors. What about Doug Polk's range? So this is the range I have for him defending against 3-bet. One thing, by the way, you can also, with the presets here and these ranges, it's easy to delete them if you no longer want random ones hanging out. So we'll go ahead, delete these, and leave the 2 key ones. And this is going to be his range for defending against 3-bet. Now you might say, isn't he going to have a 4-bet range? Isn't he going to be 4-betting these hands some of the time? And I think the answer to that is yes, he is very likely to have a 4-bet range. And so the way we can model that is with the bucket selector, which is a very cool way of doing ranges. So I'm going to left click on the bucket, and I'm going to go to, let's say, 50%. And I'm going to take some hands and say, I think half the time he's going to 4-bet. If he has ace-king, he's going to 4-bet some of these suited wheel aces. He's occasionally going to 4-bet suited connectors, some suited broadways. And you can also do very customized ones. So one thing I think is interesting is what is he going to do with pocket aces? So with pocket aces, I think that he's going to 4-bet this hand more than half the time. And an easy way to switch that is with the mouse wheel in the center of my mouse. I'm just going to scroll down. And I think that 80% of the time he's going to 4-bet this hand, meaning that only 20% of the time would he flat with it. So let's leave in this range for him. We'll click OK. And now we have set up the hand in Postflopizer, and we'll go ahead and calculate. So let's start here on the upper left. First thing we'll notice is that the green check mark is present. This indicates that our desired level of exploitability has been met. And the EV is going to be the EV, of course, for each player, which will sum to the pot size. So the pot going into the flop is 31, and it's going to incorporate their ranges, their positions, their strategies. And so Tom Dwan is on the tighter range, connects very well with this dry flop. So that's probably a big component of why he has such a nice EV edge here. And the EVs will, by the way, incorporate these player strategies. So we can modify the strategy and the EV will change. We're going to talk a lot more about editing strategies later in this video, but just as a quick preview and to show that the EV does account for the strategy, let's go ahead and I'm going to go to Edit Strategy. And the way we're going to do it is that Tom Dwan's GTO c-bet percent is about 75%. So he's supposed to be c-betting a lot here. And let's say that instead he checks most or all hands. Currently his EV is 18.4. And so will this exploitative adjustment change his EV? We're expecting that the answer is yes. It will in fact lower his EV if he randomly starts checking all the time. So we can do that. I'm going to select check. I'm going to hold down my left mouse key. Okay, so now he's checking. We'll make it literally every hand. I'm going to click apply and calculate. So really easy to edit strategies here. And we'll see what happens with that 18.39 EV. And sure enough, his EV decreases to 17.95. Not actually, if anything, I would have predicted a bigger EV change. This is interesting. And you can make these wherever you want. See where the EVs change. So now go to unlock and calculate. Again, we'll talk more about editing strategies a little bit later in this video. And like I said, I want to consider this largely from Doug Polk's perspective. So once Tom Dwan has, bet, he makes the c-bet, we now can look at Doug Polk's strategy. So in Postflopizer, the top is going to be navigation. We'll talk shortly about how to navigate around in hands. And we have 5 different analytical modes. The first one is pocket hand. And so for any hand, we're going to see whether the players should raise, call, or fold, and what percent of the time they should take each of those actions. So as an example, with ace queen offsuit, we should fold, call, and raise with percent for each. And we can hover over to get this tooltip. We see that we should raise 11% of the time, call 33%, fold 56% of the time. How we decide that is going to be a function of suits, which we'll look at in just a moment. We have the EVs, the equities. There are going to be 12 ace-queen combos available. So this is the tooltip for each square. Now I'm going to click on it, and it's going to show what we should do with every single available combo. And we can do that either as a square, so one for each, or in table format where we can look up and say, okay, with the queen of diamonds, then this is how we want to play it. So toggle between these. Equity is going to be equity versus range. So here, for example, with pocket queens, kind of like a way ahead, way behind spot here, we have 58.7% equity. This means that with pocket queens against Tom Dwan's entire range, we have a 58-42 approximate equity edge against his range. And we can also do the EV of each of these hands. When we're on strategy, there's no option to add in strategy because it's already displayed. When we're on equity or EV, we can do a hybrid view that shows both equity and strategy. We can also click on one of these, and it'll show only the hands that we're supposed to call, raise, or fold. So take a look here on the right. We have made hand plus draw. We can look at just made hands, just draws, or normally I'll do the combo view. And if we're interested in, let's say, for example, just sets, I can hover here on the left-hand side. The sets will pop up. And we can take a look and see that the weights, so what percent of the time we have them. We can see with the set we have a pretty equal mix of calling and raising, even though overall we're going to lean a lot more toward calling than raising. And do the same thing for any of these categories. So before we get to the other analytical modes, why don't we find out the answer to this question? If I had had 5-4 of spades and I was playing this $1 million cash game, personally, I would have just folded. So am I right? Is Doug Polk right? The way we do that is we click on 5-4 suited. We see that with these two combos, the hearts and clubs combos, we're supposed to simply fold. With diamonds, we mainly call and raise some of the time. And with spades, we have a fairly even mix, slightly weighted toward folds, but we call plenty of the time as well. So this float with the two backdoor draws is completely reasonable. We should be making this play over 40% of the time with this specific combo. So that was our first very interesting result there, that Doug Polk was totally fine deciding to continue on in this hand with his 5-4 of spades. So let's check out the other analytical modes, and I'll come back to made hand matrix in a second. Let's take a look at OOP versus IP. So this is going to give us kind of like a boxing tail of the tape. And this is the number of combos in each player's range, and the number of combos, I should say, at this specific point in the hand. So at this point in the hand, Tom Dwan has c-bet. He is supposed to check a quarter of the time. So because of that, he has fewer combos in his range. This is the combos in his range for playing the hand pre-flop as he does, and then making a c-bet of 15 big blinds. Doug Polk has many more combos. Equities are range against range. So Tom Dwan's range has 61% equity against Doug Polk's 39% equity. We have the EVs of the ranges. We can then look and see that Tom Dwan has 7% sets versus 4.6% for Doug Polk, and those are highlighted in the tables. If we go to air, which in this case would be king high, basically playing the flop, literally the only combo Tom Dwan has that's air is 6-5 suited, whereas Doug Polk has many air combos. And on the right, we can change this. So if we do strategy plus range, notice that's only giving a strategy for Doug Polk. That's because action is on him. If we switch to a different point of the hand where action is on Tom Dwan, then instead it will display his strategy, which it does here. So again, range versus range will not display the strategy. Strategy plus range will display the strategies. We can also go to either player's equities, EVs, and you can toggle around. So you can go to any point of the hand you want. Let me give you an example of that. Okay, so right now, Doug Polk is on a very wide range. He has a real equity disadvantage. Let's say we want to switch, and I click on raise 52. If I do that, Tom Dwan's range will be the same, but Doug Polk, since he's not supposed to raise very often, is going to have many fewer combos in his raise 52 range, and presumably his equity and EV will change quite a bit. So now he's down to 23 combos. He actually has an equity edge. His EV has gone up a lot, so this is a very different range, and you can toggle to any point in the hand to get this comparison. Next, we go to table, and table is going to show every single combo, and the default sorting is by pocket hand, so you get to lower pocket hands with lower ranks at the bottom. Let me actually go back to this point in the hand, and what I really like about table is that you can sort by whatever metric you're interested in. So if you're looking for just the hands that are supposed to raise most often, click here on raise 52. If you're looking for the hands that have the highest equity against your opponent's range, you can click here, the highest EV hands. So this is a really cool way to sort by, again, whatever metric you're interested in. And now we're going to look at made hand matrix, which is just super cool. I love the made hand matrix. On the y-axis, we have made hand categories. On the x-axis, we have draw, broken down very nicely. And we can go to either whole rows, whole columns, or intersections. So here, for example, 7% of the time we have top pair, and the top pair hands are highlighted. 10% of the time we have a flush draw. Potential flush draws are highlighted. And we have the intersection. So here we have the intersection of backdoor flush draw and medium pair. And you get your tooltip, you get it highlighted in the right. So made hand matrix is really cool. And we're going to have another use for made hand matrix that I love that I'll show you a little bit later in the video. But this is an amazing way to drill down and look at very specific categories of hands. You can switch again to equities or EVs. The default is going to be percent. So 10% of the time we have a flush draw, but you can also switch here to pound sign, which means the absolute number of combos. Only look at calling, at folding, and breaking it down this way. All right, so there's one more, turn run out. So you might say, well, this is grayed out. You know, like we need to be able to click on this. And the reason why it's grayed out is because we haven't gone to return yet. And in order to get to return, we need to navigate around in this hand. And there are two ways to do that. One is within the game tree, and one is line navigation. So if we want to select the actual sequence that happened, we can just click here, flop was dealt, a C bet of 15, a call. We headed to the turn, which was the 6 of hearts, and here we are. Alternatively, we can do line navigation. So if we go back to this point in the hand, it's easy to go also backward in the hand. So the flop was dealt, there was a bet of 15, a call, turn was the 6 of hearts. And one thing that you probably noticed is that these stayed in grade when we went backward. So let's say that we're looking at the turn and then we want to look back at something from the flop. If we want, we can click anywhere and it will automatically go back to this point in the hand. So nice options here to navigate by tree, which is probably what I do most of the time, or by line. And when we do that, turn runouts is now going to be an option. So let's go ahead and click on this. And this is going to say what turn cards benefit both players. So here we have OOP EV. So Tom Dwan's EV is a function of turn card sorted by suit and rank. Why don't we instead sort it by EV's, the turn cards that benefit him the most? So we see for Tom Dwan that the turn cards he likes the most are going to be non-diamond aces, blanks, high cards, and generally speaking, the worst turn cards for him that he really doesn't want to see are going to be these diamonds. It's going to be the opposite for Doug Polk. He really wants to see these mid diamonds. He has no interest. When I say he has no interest, I mean his overall range does not benefit at all from seeing, for example, a non-diamond ace. We can also do this by equities. And one thing that is also displayed is going to be betting frequency. So the turn's been dealt, and at this point action is on Tom Dwan. Now overall, he's supposed to fire a turn c-bet about 55% of the time. But on turn cards that really benefit his range, we see here, for example, that he is c-betting over 80% of the time on very favorable turn cards, and we expect him to have a much lower c-bet on very unfavorable turn cards, where he's now checking the significant majority of the time. And you can take a look at any point in the hand. You can toggle around. So you specify a desired sequence of actions and can take a look at the new EVs and equities within the Turn Runouts tab. So let's now go back here. We have Tom Dwan has fired another barrel, and action is going to be on Doug Polk. So at this point, the first thing we see here is that Doug Polk is supposed to continue on with a pretty wide range, and so he only folds a bit over a quarter of the time, about 28-29% of the time. When he does continue, it's mainly going to be by calling. And let's look again at 5-4 suited. So 5-4 of clubs and of hearts are no longer in his range. He was supposed to fold them every single instance at the flop. So they'll now be grayed out here, and more of this square is going to be white. And with 5-4 of diamonds, he would have a combo draw, which he's supposed to call most of the time and raise the rest. With 5-4 of spades, he's supposed to call 100% of the time. Interesting result. You might think, well, without the diamond draw, we benefit more from getting our opponent to fold. So it could have worked either way, but in fact, he's always supposed to call. Does this mean that Doug Polk made a mistake in the hand? And the answer is maybe, but not definitely. For example, he might have put Tom Dwan on a different range pre-flop, which will affect the output and the post-flop. It could be that he thinks that Tom Dwan is going to play differently. He's making certain exploitative assumptions based on their history together or things that he's observed about Tom Dwan. Now, if that is his thought process, then he's in luck because he can model that very accurately in Postflopizer. We'll do that slightly later in this video. But it doesn't mean that Doug Polk made a mistake, depending on the assumptions he's making. But what it does mean is that assuming you agree with the pre-flop ranges and assuming that you want to play GTO, you are supposed to just call with the 5-4 of spades. We can again go to all of these tabs and see, for example, first on the right, made hand plus draw. These are the top pair weak kicker hands. We can see that he's supposed to always call with these hands. We can take a look at OOP versus IP at the turn. So at this stage of the hand, we have a nice equity edge for Tom Dwan still. The table, we've looked at turn runouts. We've looked at the made hand matrix. So let's go ahead now and progress onward in this hand. So we have the raise to 115. We have the call. And we go to the river, which is the 6 of spades. Okay. So there are going to be a few things that we notice right away. The first thing is that Tom Dwan is supposed to have no betting range. And this might seem kind of surprising at first, but of course the reason for it is because Doug Polk has taken over the betting lead. He's raised the turn. And so as a result of that, we now check to him, allowing him to fire with his bluffs to have our range lose a bit less when he's super strong. So Tom Dwan is simply supposed to check, which he does. And action is going to be on Doug Polk. One thing here, by the way, we also have our river runouts tab. So in river runouts, we see that, let's actually go back a little bit. So the river's dealt. Click on river runouts. And Tom Dwan still wants these aces, these blanks. He has no interest in these mid diamonds. Ace of diamonds is a very bad card for him. So these are cards that are very bad for his range. It'll be the opposite. Doug Polk's range benefits a lot from the diamonds, is hurt a lot by these aces and blanks. And you can again scroll around to any point in the river action sequence and have river runouts automatically update. So our opponent checks, and what we would expect now is that Doug Polk is extremely polarized in his river overbet range. He's not going to get anything from equity denial or protecting his hand or any other reason besides a bluff or a value bet. So we can see if the made hand strategy reflects that. And what we see is that if he has a full house, he always value bets. If he has two pair, so the two sixes on board mean that this is effectively a one pair hand that became two pair, then he's always going to check those. And third pair, meaning air, he's going to bluff the minority of the time, but he is going to have a bluffing range, which consists of these air hands. So what should he do specifically with 5-4 suited? Now 5-4 suited is not an option when it comes to the 5-4 of spades combo, because we're supposed to call instead of raise at the turn. But 5-4 of diamonds is the single worst hand he makes it to the river with, and he bluffs this hand 100% of the time. So presumably he would also be bluffing the 5-4 of spades. And so this is a very reasonable hand for Doug Polk to put in his bluffing range. He makes a good river bluff. Now, unfortunately, the bluff doesn't work out, and we have the perhaps surprising result that Tom Dwan, facing this bet, goes into the tank for a very long time. I think clock is called on him either both at the turn and the river by Doug Polk, or if not, he tanks for a very long time before electing to just call. And we might say, shouldn't he raise here? So let's take a look at that. And the answer is that if we look at his raising range, which will be a jam here, it's pretty much just pocket kings that is strong enough to check shove against this very polarized bet. He can occasionally bluff, very occasionally, with ace-2 suited, king-jack suited with other hands at a very low frequency. But a huge part and the only value hand in his raising range is going to be pocket kings. If we click here on sevens, he's supposed to call 100% of the time. So this appears to be a very nice decision to just call by Tom Dwan. So we've now looked at the complete hand, and I want to talk more about strategy editing. So let's go ahead and do that. Now again, you can easily navigate around. This is a relatively complex point of the hand in terms of how elaborate the action sequence is. So let's go back to simpler times. I'll just click on dealing turn. Recall that later actions remain grayed out. So if we change our minds and want to go back here, it's very easy to do. So dealing turn. Now there are two ways to edit strategy. One is I can right click here and edit the strategy of his turn c-bet. And the other way I can do it is to click on edit strategy. And let's go ahead and do that. So in order to edit, we have two options here. In a situation, for example, where there's a fold, call, and raise, there would be three of these pure strategies. So I can click on one and I can say that I want to make these pure checks. So if Tom Dwan has ace check suited, ace 10 suited, or ace 9 suited, he's always going to check. With ace 4 suited, ace 3 suited, he's always going to bet. You can click on these preset mixes and you can go very specific. If for whatever reason you think that there are certain hands that are going to have a 27% betting and 73% checking frequency, simply create a custom strategy and modify them this way. Now, one thing when you're doing that is you can drag. So if I click edit strategy and I want to go to check, I can simply hold my left mouse key and quickly go and make these changes. Another way that you can do that is going to be within the Pocket Hands tab. So if you have a specific idea within suits, you can go ahead and modify that. So I think this specific pocket aces combo, I want to make a bet. I can do that. So there's this great degree of customizability. And in addition, within made hand and draw, you can set whole categories at once. So I can make this category check, 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 and when you do that, it will update in the table, and you can make sure that you've done that correctly. So this is going to be one way to edit strategies. But one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the time you're not going to know what a player is going to do with a specific hand, or it might be difficult to guess at. Also, within the made hand matrix, so let me go ahead and exit out of this. If we select something like no draw, then that's going to include made hands as well. It's not going to be just air hands that have no draw. It's going to be strong hands that do not have a draw component. So one of my favorite ways to edit strategies in Postflopizer is within the made hand matrix. So I love this feature. Let's say, for example, this is, I think, a very practical adjustment. Let's say that what Doug Polk believes is that Tom Dwan is a very aggressive player. And if he has air at the turn, he's going to fire that. He's not going to want to simply give up. So he's going to be firing his air. How would we model that? So to do that, I'm going to click on Edit Strategy. And I'm going to select Bets. And I'm going to take a look at the intersection of certain categories. So the first one here, the intersection of no draw and just high cards. So he's got no kind of made hand. He's got no draw. He's supposed to be checking here a lot. Well, we don't buy that. Durr's super aggressive. Same with his weak pair. He's going to turn his third pair of hands into bluffs. With his flush draws, if he also has any kind of weak pair, he'll check them some of the time, sure. But if he has a flush draw with literally just a high card, we're going to switch those to bets. And this will be reflected in the pre-flop starter tables. And before I click apply and calculator do auto lock others, so other aspects of this hand are going to stay the same. It's simply with the orange locked hands that we are making this exploitative change. So auto lock others is selected. I click apply and calculate. And that's done. And before we see how this modifies the subsequent portion of the hand, notice here that these gray locks indicate that the flop is going to play out how it does initially. So he's going to have, for example, Tom Dwan the same flop c-bet percent. So the hand plays as it does according to GTO strategies until we get to this turn c-bet decision. Now, when Tom Dwan fires the turn c-bet, we now have a very different situation when we're looking at Doug Polk's response. So look at this, he almost never folds. His fold percent now is down to under 3%. We can click here and we see that the only hands he folds are going to be junk hands pretty much. So ace high, king high hands, no draw hands, he's going to fold. Other than that, he's going to be calling the vast majority of the time. And this also isn't going to make him more inclined to raise the 5-4 suited. He's simply supposed to call this particular combo 100% of the time. So you can make these exploitative adjustments to any range you want and see how that's going to impact the best response for the other player. So let's start looking into editing strategies. And I want to take a look now at one other thing. So if we're in create post flop, one thing that's very cool is you can have multiple calculations going at the same time. So let's say that we make an adjustment to the game tree and we add in another sizing here. I can click add to queue. And then I want to go back to this basic hand and delete something here, and I'm going to add this to queue. And I can have multiple going at the same time. I can then promote something to the top priority by clicking calculate instead of add to queue. And we see here every time there's one more going into queue. And the history tab is going to reflect this. So the history tab for any given row, the green check mark means we did the calculation until the desired level of exploitability was met. It'll display factual data about the hand, the disk space, tree size, memory, when you did it. And then for ones that are incomplete, that it didn't finish the calculation, you can add those to the queue, cancel if you want. And for ones that have the lock, that means that you have made a strategy adjustment. You've edited strategy, and you can go ahead and load those. This will apply to the one that's above it. So as an example here, this is an edited strategy applying to the ace 10 6 hand. And for completed ones, I can go ahead, I can load this. And we'll notice here, it just disappeared, but let's go ahead and create a new situation and talk for a second about lightning mode. So we add this and I'll click calculate. So here lightning mode means the calculation will proceed a little bit faster. The I mode will give a little bit of added precision and be a little bit slower. Normally, I like to leave it on lightning mode. And so you can have lots of calculations going at the same time using the queue feature and check on everything within the history tab. So I think we're going to call it here. To me, this is a pretty incredibly powerful post-flop tool that has a surprisingly easy learning curve, looks beautiful, it's fun to use, and just super powerful, where you can create and edit complex game trees, see exactly what to do with every type of made hand and draw in your range, look at how different turn and river cards impact both players' strategies, and you have the vital feature of editing strategies and locking nodes to maximally exploit your opponent's tendencies. I'd encourage you guys to check out these features for yourself with the free demo, and also like, share, and subscribe for more advanced tutorials and content. Thanks very much for watching. This has been Collin Moshman for Postflopizer.